Hi Lark TV, welcome back to Artist Spotlight, the show where I sit down with a Lark community member to get to know them a little bit more. I'm your host, Reyes, and today we're being joined by artistic director, dancer, Lucille Ortel award-winning actor, and new father, Gregg Mozgala.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today, and again, congratulations on the new baby.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So usually I start this interview with your origin story. So you grew up in North Carolina.
Yeah, not originally. My father was in the Navy, so we moved around quite a bit. So I was born in Virginia and then moved down to North Carolina my freshman year of high school.
And was theater a thing in high school for you, or was it much later?
Yeah, that was actually discovered that in junior high, like 7th grade, when I was living in Virginia outside DC. And I remember I took a speech and drama class, Mrs. Ryan's speech and drama class, and
shout out.
Yeah, totally. Those first teachers, they're like, you never forget. So, but really, we had to do all sort of like public presentations and stuff, like demonstrations. And the first sort of dramatic presentation we had to do, I chose the Friends, Romans, Countrymen speech from Julius Caesar. And I just, so I have cerebral palsy, and whenever I get nervous, it doesn't so happen so much anymore, but when I was younger, my leg used to shake like a jackhammer. And so I remember being up in front of the class, and that didn't happen, like through the embodiment of that character, and actually like knocked it out of the park. Like it just felt really good, and I realized that something happened, like some dynamic shifted, and I had control of my audience for the first time, if that makes any sense. Because growing up and even still today for the rest of my life, as long as I'm moving, I'm gonna have to sort of negotiate people's looks and stares, and in that case. But just that moment, like that magical thing happened, and all of a sudden it was like the magic of theater happened, like in that 7th grade classroom, and I really felt I was like Mark Antony, like addressing,
Friends are always okay.
Yeah. So it was really, really cool. So I think that just that kick, that's the bug, or whatever you want to call it, So that's what got me, and that's what started.
And did you do productions in high school, or did that come in college?
Yeah, like drama club, youth theater. And when I moved to North Carolina, they had like a decent community theater. And I remember the first week we moved there, my mother signed me up for this like week-long workshop with these two. They were in their mid-20s at the time. But these two women, Molly Bass and Brooke Davis. And Molly Bass was actually a playwright, and Brooke was an actor and eventually got a PhD in theater from Wake Forest. And so I took this week-long workshop with them, and they became sort of like lifelong friends, and sort of older sisters and stuff, and like just hung out with them for years and years. But yeah, that's sort of where it started. And then I eventually went to the North Carolina School of the Arts for my senior year of high school.
And then you went to BU.
That's right, yeah, Boston University.
Yeah. And did you know that you were going to study theater in college as well?
Yeah, well, once I went to NCSA, like you audition at the end of that year, and my folks are from Massachusetts. My mother grew up in the Boston area. So it was like I had family there. It was a big city, which I wanted. I didn't feel like I was quite ready for New York at the time, but I wanted a city, and BU was a conservatory. So it just felt like a good fit.
And you went to the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts. Was that right after, or?
Well, we did a semester abroad my junior year. So we did, but actually my freshman year of college at BU, the last sort of thing we did, so the teacher that really got me into writing and really started cultivating my love for like playwrights and whatnot was this professor named John Lipsky. And so at the end of freshman year, we did this long-form improv, like 3-hour-long thing in one of the biggest studios called the Life Exercise, where you had to, you were born, you went through birth to basically death, or like wherever you ended up in the in the 3 hours. Yeah, but basically you were born and like you just would have whoever you ran across in the room. Suddenly you were, in a fight with them or making love to them or working for them or whatever it was. And I remember John asked me at the end of it. I don't know where he got this, but he's like, "Hey, I'm just really curious, dude. In this exercise, were you disabled?" And I said no. And he's like, "That's really fascinating. I think you should, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's explore that." And he was writing. The next year, he was running like a playwriting workshop with just a few people. And do you know Raul Castillo? He's a writer. Yeah. So he was a year ahead of me.
Oh, okay.
But he was in that workshop with some others, and John just brought me in as his assistant, really, just to observe. And I ended up writing a play there out of that, which is sort of a semi-autobiographical piece, which won the Kennedy Center ACTF competition that year.
Casual.
Yeah, and then that's where I met Moritz von Stulpnagel, the director.
Yeah.
And he was, and he ended up directing that, and so that was really the start of it. And also BU, I remember taking a modern drama class, and we studied all these. We were studying modern drama, but there was this anthology of plays with all these different writers, Tony Kushner and David Herman Wang, and just from every background you can imagine. I remember thinking, I'm not represented here, anywhere in the American canon. So what's my experience? And so that's the seed of I feel like everything I'm doing started around the end of my senior year of high school and through sophomore year of college. And that's just been following that basic trajectory.
And you mentioned that he asked you if you were disabled, and you said no.
Right.
What was that journey like?
That particular exercise, or
just what?
Yeah, it was weird because I have I don't know. It's this is something I'm really trying to figure out and grappling with, and probably will for the rest of my life. But I didn't really sort of begin to own my identity as a disabled person until I was in my 30s. Because I had, up until that point, I had a very sort of adversarial relationship with my body. My nervous system is working against my body all the time, even just talking here. The way that the system works around CP perceives everything as a threat. So, or put more plainly, a fear of falling. So I'm in a constant state of fight or flight, and I feel that in my body in myriad ways, from tension in the soles of my feet right now to big, larger spasms. If I feel like I'm gonna fall or somebody gets too close to me, or anyway, I don't know what sets it off. But it's this highly sensitive, finely tuned and calibrated system that is sort of wired for defense. And I didn't understand that until I got involved in the dance piece that I did several years ago. So I had problems. Obviously every kid wants to fit in, right? And with a visible difference, you're singled out pretty quickly as a kid. On the playground and everything. It was so apparent that I couldn't keep up. And I got into theater because my mother was an athlete, almost qualified for the Olympics athlete.
What sport?
Track and field, decathlon and stuff like that. So we all played sport. I have the third of four siblings, so we all played sports growing up. So, but around 6th grade, the start of adolescence and all that stuff, I just physically couldn't keep up anymore.
Yeah.
So it was incredibly frustrating and just emotionally, I was a wreck. So theater became an outlet. My mother she was great. She demanded participation, which I respect now a great deal. I didn't always at the time, growing up. And she was really great at encouraging me in whatever I showed interest in. So theater became that thing when sports or athletics were no longer an option for me. So that's why she signed me up for that class.
Yeah.
You know, when we moved.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I don't want that. You know, like just fighting it the whole way. And then it became this really wonderful pathway. So, yeah. So it's been really, I think I'm always going to have a complicated relationship with myself and that part of myself. But it's really, as an actor, you know, you're told to bring your full self to everything you do, right? So I just, for decades, I was really denying an essential part of my humanity, right? And I wouldn't acknowledge it on stage. I would try to hide it or cover it up. And I don't think I'm alone in this. But I feel like it's so really discovering that that's who I am. Every character I ever play is going to have my particular nervous system, my gait.
Yeah.
Like this is, you know, that's going to cause, may limit what people perceive I can do or what roles I can play. But that's why I started creating work and, you know, making and being generative so we can develop material not only for myself but others in my community to be in and participate in. Because I found like through the creation of that, through all this artistic process, through what art does naturally, as far as like building community and get people to show up and that collaborative process, it's brought me closer to my community and brought my community towards me in a way that I've never really had ever in my life. So.
We'll get to all the things that you're doing now in
Cool.
a little
Yeah.
bit. But so after college, you're going to go back.
Yeah, okay.
After college, did you move to New York right away?
Yeah, I came here in 2000.
And you didn't pursue being a full-time actor right away, right?
Well, no, I did. You know, I had a BFA and like just felt like hot shit. And if I could say that, sorry.
Yeah.
You know, and just I'm classically trained. Like I've been through you know, this high-ranking institution. Like that should mean something. And I learned very quickly that that was not going to be the case. So, and that was true even in school, like in undergrad. So BU had, I was the last year that had cuts after sophomore year. So we started with a class of 60 and ended with around 20. And in my second year evaluation, I remember a teacher said, "Have you ever tried acting without your disability?" So, which only compounded my confusion, right, around how I work with what my raw materials and idiosyncrasies as an actor. So that I was pretty much in my head and completely confused about how to make that happen for the last 2 years of school. And then when I got out of school, I got a job with a company that's no longer around anymore called the National Theater Workshop of the Handicapped. And I worked as an administrator. But that was sort of the first theater that I ever was like, oh, there's a place for me, you know, or is making work for, with, and by, you know, disabled individuals, and because I had never run across any other company like that before. And that was complicated in its own way, like that's a whole other sort of story. But I remember being in that office one day and seeing, like I had seen a notice for a production of This Is Our Youth by Ken Lonergan at the Berkshire Theater Festival. And I had an agent from my showcase at BU agree to freelance with me. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, can you get me an audition for this part?" I was like, why would you want to do that? I said, "Oh, okay. Well, you know, I feel like I'm the right type, good for the role, like, can you just get me in the door?" And he said, "No, I don't think so. They're looking for normal guys." So I was like, I've never been so mad. Like if I could have reached through the phone and strangled the guy, I would have. But again, like there was something, as harsh as that was, there was something really, I found to date, really true about that statement. And so because for most of my professional career, I've only ever booked paying work where there's been some disability attached to the character, associated with the character. So the fact that he was saying that was actually, he was pointing to a much larger perception and reality in the industry that I am glad that I realized that early on. And you know, I think this industry is really, it may be true in any business or industry or anything you follow, but it's not just the people who encourage you, but it's usually the people who like really are obstacles to your success that spur you to do, to keep going, right, and do even more. So I think that, again, was another really foundational moment for me. Of like, what do I do? That's what people think.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the perception and the reality that I'm dealing with right now, then how do I address that? Yeah. So it became about just working wherever I could, and for me that became, you know, most of my initial success was building relationships through playwrights.
Mm-hmm.
So I got involved with Youngblood and Ensemble Studio Theater. That's where I met Lloyd. And others here, and just, you know, whether it was reading small plays, whatever. But for, 10 years, it was just like scrapping, doing, you know, whatever I could just to work.
And then you were in a production of Romeo and Juliet,
right?
With theater breaking through barriers.
That's right, yeah.
And that was sort of catapulted you into another project, right?
Yeah, totally. So that was really cool. I mean, we did. I had never. The opportunity to play Romeo, right? Because I'd never. That was a 4-person production, so we were playing like multiple roles. So it was really, really cool, and an integrated production. So there were it's myself, a visually impaired actor, and 2 non-disabled actors.
Mm-hmm.
So I never, I didn't see myself as a Romeo type, or, you know, this sort of like the classical lover in Western literature.
And how long was that from moving to New York? Like, what was the gap between
that was
moving and then
7-8 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So because Theater Breaking Through Barriers used to be Theater by the Blind,
mm-hmm.
and they received a huge grant from TCG, Theater Communications Group, that year to become more inclusive of other disabilities.
Mm.
So I met with the artistic director. So my first show, my first sort of off-Broadway gig, which got me my equity card, was with them as TBTB. And I was just hired as an audio describer, like on an equity contract. They did this with most of their shows that weren't Shakespeare, but they would hire another actor just to audio describe the action of the play. So I was on there sort of as a non-intrusive narrator / audio describer. And that first play was, oh my gosh, The Rules of Charity by John Beluso,
mm-hmm.
Who's a disabled playwright, who unfortunately passed away in 2006. But in that play, a character mentions this place, the Apothetae, which is a hole in the ground in Sparta in ancient Greece where, you know, they would leave any babies who were born and didn't fit into the Spartan worldview of sort of perfect form and condition. They would just leave them to the elements. So the character said, you know, that translates to the place of exposure, and that disabled people, he says, since the dawn of time, disabled people don't know their history because we weren't allowed to have a history.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so. I just was listening to that line every night for, you know, months and months, and that just really had an impact on me because I named my company the Apothetae.
Yeah.
You know, and I had met John while at the Kennedy Center doing my show. So it just, but I'm fascinated by that very idea because, again, going back to BU, like what other populations and marginalized communities have done is sort of use theater as a vehicle to tell their story, to share their histories, you know, with an audience, maybe within their communities first, and then it's broken through to the larger mainstream,
mm-hmm.
right? Commercial theater, television, film, and so, but disability hadn't done that yet. So I was like, I'm also really interested in history. So, as a community, what is our history, individual or collective? So I want to like it's about reclaiming, you know, and I love the idea of that place of exposure and playing on that double entendre of how do we shed light into dark places, or the darkest portions of our history, you know, and share those stories and bring them to light.
And so let's go back a little bit too, because Romeo and Juliet also catapulted you into Diagnosis of a Faun, right?
Right. Yeah.
Tamara Goff kind of saw you and just reached out, right? There's this. It was sort of like on the.
Yeah. So we got a good review in the New York Times, and I was like shirtless, you know, in the New York Times, which I've been a lot actually. Not bragging. It's just the truth. So
they're out there.
So it was really cool, and like I have to thank Tamar's husband, Dick, because he saw the review and said, "I think you might like this."
Mm.
So they came to see the show, and they actually saw it twice, I think. But she was really interested in my physicality and my movement, and after the show, she contacted Ike Chamberlain, who was the founding artistic director at the time, and got my information and said, "Do you want to work with me?" And it started, you know, very simply, like I didn't have a job, like had nothing going on, and somebody was offering me work, and I just said yes. And while I was at North Carolina School of Arts, I got to see a ton of dance. Like I just was devouring like every show that I could possibly see, and it's because I was fascinated. I'm fascinated with human movement, but dancers especially. So the opportunity to sort of engage in that practice was really exciting to me. So I just said yes, and little did we know that it would turn into this like multi-year process that would eventually like end up changing my gait and rewiring my nervous system and doing all this crazy, insane stuff. But that was, an incredible, life-changing moment, which, you know, the piece was presented at La Mama in 2008, and we eventually made a documentary about it called Enter the Faun, which premiered in 2011, eventually made it onto PBS, and we've been all over the world, like, working with, you know, medical professionals, the dance community, the disability community, just sharing sort of our discoveries through that piece. Mm-hmm. But that has sort of calmed down, but for, I would say, about 10 years from start to finish. That was a whole decade of my life where we were like connected and working on that piece. Mm. So it was really amazing. But yeah, and that helped me, that piece actually helped me get an agent and a manager. So yes, it did. Like there was like a very quick...
it all happens.
Yeah. And then I think like the confidence I gained from that piece gave me the confidence to start the Apothetae.
Yeah.
And the company.
So let's talk about the Apothetae.
Okay.
How did you start that? Like, and how are you've been commissioning work, right? From many different playwrights, including Teen Chick was an Apothetae commission. So let's start from the very beginning of the Apothetae. You kind of gave us sort of like where it came from and the impulse to do it. And so the beginning, what was the work like? The
impulse to start the company was, again, there was just this dearth of material, like good material, to be in that it sort of, I didn't see my experience reflected back in me. Mm-hmm. And I was, through my work with TBTB, I was very fortunate to work with them on several plays and productions. And that was great, but I just felt like even the work there felt very siloed, and it wasn't reflective of my experience. Because I don't know if you've ever felt this, but like while working with them, I felt somehow, unintentionally, completely unintentionally, I felt sort of cut off from the larger community. Mm. Like it was great that it gave me access to other disabled actors and a link to an artistic community that happened to be integrated but had disabled people in it. But that's, I think one thing that people don't understand is that's not intuitive to me. Like that is a foreign exercise. Mm. You know, it's because even growing up as a kid, if I wanted to be around other disabled people, I had to go away. Yeah. You know, and like go to a special camp or, you know, it just wasn't part of my natural experience, lived-in experience. So, and the fact that I didn't start really engaging with the disabled community and the theater community as an adult until I was 26, it's just still mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
And I'm still finding it today, but and I think, as I said, the art has enabled that in a way for me that nothing else has. So, but the Apothetae was just, I want more stories, right? And I want to create more stories, and I want to mitigate those circumstances where that feeling of being cut off, right, or siloed. I want to give myself and any members of the community access to other directors, other writers, other points of view, like, because the only way Romeo and Juliet made me better because somebody said, you know, Ike said, you're going to play this role even though you think you can't.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Tamar said, you're going to dance even though you think you can't. You know, so I really appreciate rigor, and I really appreciate, you know, hard work. So again, that was sort of the main goal. So I had all these ideas, you know, for four plays, and then 5. Teenage Dick was the 5th. And then I was pairing writers that I thought would be a good fit for those roles. And then I had known Lloyd from Youngblood, and I knew he was here. And I just said, can we meet? Because I need dramaturgical support. And that's how the relationship with the Lark started. Mm-hmm. But it was really just that initial impulse of let's just make plays and see what happens.
And you've mentioned in interview before that a lot of plays or art out there that is representative of the disabled experience, it's always about like the triumph over and you mentioned that you wanted to kind of diversify that representation a little bit.
Totally. So there are three sort of pervasive narratives out there in our culture and society. Actually, I think I may have coined, I don't know, I think I may have coined the disabled experience. Mm-hmm. Like, because I know other people have asked me if they could borrow that. So I don't know if anyone has actually ever heard that until, so, not to pat myself on the back, but, you know, that's, I'm sure I'll claim that shit.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah, totally. But I think, so the 3 pervasive narratives are overcoming obstacles, being an inspiration, and death with dignity. Yeah. So, and I mean, if you look at the internet, just there are like thousands of countless examples of just memes and news stories and everything else, and it's and very often does that disabled person featured in that particular story ever have a voice, right? So it's like, how do you? Well, we're much more complex than that. You know, we're human beings. Like, we come from somewhere. We're members of communities, families. You know, again, we're human, right? Yeah. So I think that with those narratives, there's a dehumanization and an infantilization that occurs, right? That keeps the image of what disability is in this nice little box, you know. So how do we? So that's what, like, if we look at history, if we look at where we come from, what are narratives, either from history or in popular culture, that we can pull from, and, like, again, just explore, like, what was happening around that time. How can the piece of work serve as a larger conversation for that experience with a larger audience? And again, I started because I needed context for myself as an individual with a disability, but also I needed to know what my larger context was within the disability community, but also, you know, society at large. So it's all, it's looking for my own place, my own sense of belonging, and again, my own relationship of self, I think. And so I'm always looking for just fine-tuning what that is and what that definition is. You know, a big inspiration was August Wilson and his, you know, 20th century cycle. Yeah, and I was like, well, so just looking at that, like, what if we did that? Mm-hmm. Like, if I got a huge grant to sort of develop 10, 12 plays, I would look at the 20th century and the 21st century. I would follow that sort of August Wilson model and say, where were we at 1900, where were we? 1910, 20, you know. But we can go back even
Yeah.
further if we want. So, but that was sort of that was also informing my thinking and how I commission pieces as well. So, but I've had to do, what's great about it is I've had to do research and sort of find out about my own history.
Yeah.
Right? But all those things, like what the experience with Tamar did, because we were traveling everywhere, because even in working together so intimately with the body, right, and through dance, we had to develop a vocabulary of how to work together. So we were practicing articulation, like all the time, sort of cerebral articulation and literal physical articulation. And so I feel like I have gotten just really good at that, just from working that muscle over and over and over again. And as I meet new people, as I engage in more work, you know, I want to keep working that muscle, and not let I'm getting older, so I don't want my thinking and feelings to sort of calcify around, like this is the way to do things, or this is what I feel. So how do I stay sort of loose and flexible, and open and curious, you know, about my own experience and the larger experience.
I really love what you mentioned about history, because specifically like the work with the Apothetae, like just I'm sensing sort of like the making sure that disabled people are present in like classical works. I've seen that, and you mentioned that you also are a classically trained actor. So I want to talk about Tim's play, the first, the inaugural recipient of the Apothetae and the Lark Fellowship. And again, it's sort of like looking at history, centering disabled people, or like where their participation in that. So can we talk about
of course.
Tim and the fellowship?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can never. I think what you're saying about centering disabled people is very important, right? And their involvement or participation, because historically, disabled people have been put away, institutionalized. There was this series of laws in the books for decades and decades called ugly laws. You know, where if you were deemed not physically attractive, or if you were seen as a blight on the streets, you could be thrown in jail or an institution. And that had to do with physical disability, homeless people, drunkards, whatever, you know, but like those, or people just straight up killed us.
Yeah.
You know, either at the Apothetae or through euthanasia, eugenics, you know, the Nazi regime, whatever it was, you know. So I think, and I think that's still, somehow that perception is still, there's a lack of proximity and there's a lack of exposure to disabled people in everyday, like, pedestrian life. So I think what theater does is sort of my vehicle to sort of reframe that and say, well, we've always been here.
Yeah.
And here's a physical, flesh and blood example of how, and here's that, again, why theater is so great. It demands participation. It demands that you show up. You're there in real time. And these are real, live, breathing people. There isn't sort of a celluloid barrier like there is in film and television. And so, yeah, to the Apothetae Lark Fellowship, you know, my original model, it was intentional to have mostly commissioned non-disabled writers. But then, you know, through conversations with Lloyd and others at the Lark, you know, it was always like, well, we need to develop from within, from our own communities. So how do we do that? We were never reinventing the wheel. You know, all we're doing is creating a space for a community or population that hasn't been able to participate or has been marginalized or shut out, to say, here's a space for you. Let's do this. So the Lark had already had, you know, an institutional history of providing fellowships and opportunities and all that stuff. So it was like, well, have you worked with this particular group yet? No. Cool, let's work together and figure it out. So Tim is as you said, the inaugural fellow. What's great about the fellowship too is we awarded 3 finalists too. But yeah, this is the play that's happening now. On every like a Heart Does Dangle,
Yeah.
or Ode.
Ode.
That's right. So it's a radical retelling of the Oedipus myth, and I'm just like that's so. Yeah, there's something so great about looking myths live because in the retelling, right? So, and how great to sort of reappropriate or reposition. I mean, Oedipus is a famous disabled character in Western literature, like a foundational character within Western society. You know, so I think it's so great that we're. What's great about what Tim has done, like beyond the epic scope of it, is he's written a radical retelling of Oedipus, where Oedipus doesn't appear at all. It's about the women in that story.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's really cool. So people come loaded, you know, with whatever knowledge they have of that play or that story, and he may be the guy that slept with his mother and gouged his eyes out, whatever they know, you know, that may be all they know about him.
Yeah.
But then they, you know, but you're playing on some larger collective consciousness, and then reframing it or rewiring like what people will see. So, and I think everything from like the start of rehearsal, even before that, right? Like, but just being in the room, all of a sudden, seeing disabled bodies in the room, working together with non-disabled bodies, with people of color, like that incredible diversity, it just adds, it's new, right? It's still a newer concept, I think, for most. But again, how can conversations shift and change? And it's that exchange, it's that building of empathy, or that practice of empathy that I think theater does really well.
Greg, thank you again so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Do you want to invite everyone to see the BareBones production of Tim J. Lord's play?
Yes, so come see Tim J. Lord's play. It's going to be right here in this room, May 10th through 19th. It's going to be fantastic, an epic night of theater. We'd appreciate your support. Support new work. That's what we're all about. We hope to see you here. Thanks so much. Hi, I'm Gregg Mozgala, Artistic Director of the Apothetae. Just here to remind you to please subscribe and donate to the Lark.